Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 6th episode of Retuning Your Firm. We missed last week. There were quite a few things happening in my life. Francesca got a new puppy. Important things in life happened. And for those of you who are particularly mathematically inclined, I used to be an accountant once, I suppose I always am. This is actually also, if it's the 6th episode of Retuning Your Firm, it also follows 15 episodes of Sharing Challenges. So what does that make us? 21 today. Awesome. So I thought it'd be really interesting if I go back to a slide which I showed you on the 20th of March. And I know there are some people who've been with us on every single week. It's not just you, Francesca. And these were the issues that were raised by 380 people before lockdown. Scary thought, because we actually did it I think lockdown was the following week. So let's look at them. Business continuity, managing work from home, government support measures, BD strategies, managing costs, and what are some of the financial impacts. So there you go. Those were the things that we were talking about back in March. What are we talking about today? Well, it's 21 today, isn't it? That's something special. That's wake you up on a bright morning. Gosh. So let's think about what were we actually talking about today? What are we really going to be focusing on? I mean, 7 strategies for retuning your firm is an area that we are pretty much pick up every time. And here's a good reason why. First of all, we've got to think big. Lewis Carroll, let's believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. Remember that you are the power of your relationships, but reciprocity is the key, and you've got to remember to reciprocate those your favors. You've also got to think small. Think about the angles that resonate with key audiences. Everyone's very busy at the moment. Think about campaigns rather than one-offs. That helps convert an audience into a community. We've got a great audience. It's fantastic the way the audience is built around this particular show. Drop the convention. Go for the new ideas and services. Remember that speed is of the essence, and that really takes you back to lean start. You've got to think about, I'm an accountant. What do we do as accountant? We come up with accounting policies. We change our assumptions. Guess what? We change our profits for our clients. Well, it's not completely simple as that, because we have people who tell us what we can and can't do, but broadly that's true. So what is the same when you're thinking about strategy? Well, think about actually what are the assumptions that you are underlie your strategy, articulate them, share them, agree them, and then market test them. And if they prove invalid, and they will, first of all, that depersonalizes strategy, which is really valuable, but then you can amend them and pivot in a new direction. That probably can't be done in 6 months, MBA style. You probably have to do it a bit quicker, hence lean start. And finally, and I think George will play with this one, who's coming on today, be entrepreneurial. Keep listening and keep innovating. And the key word in that sentence, as I keep on saying, is listening. If you're not listening to your clients, you're not listening to your people, you won't be as effective as you could be, and you may end up going in the wrong direction. And that's not something that's easy you can afford in the current climate. So I'd like to thank Elena Kudska of Globsec in Bratislava, great think tank there, talking back in, again, 7th of April. Bit of nostalgia. That one hasn't changed. The first one did a bit. So who's on the panel today? Well, we've got Paul Matthews. Paul is the founder and chief executive of P for Alchemy. As I said in my note, as you probably saw, born and bred on a farm in New Zealand, very practical guy. Wonderful weekly blog that comes out, or sort of, he's been running it for about 15 years. Always nice, easy, practical stuff. Get hold of it. People Alchemy. So he's coming to talk about learning and development, which is one of the key themes of today. Secondly, George. George is joining us from Washington State, which for some of you means, he must be quite, is it today or is it tomorrow for him? Well, it's probably our day has just started. I think that's probably about 1 in the morning for him. So he's delighted that George can join us. George, as you saw in my note again, plastic surgeon, came to the view that actually being a great plastic surgeon was one thing, not having a proper business to support it was another. Moved into a very interesting world of supporting entrepreneurs, and more recently is the director of customer experiences and success at Remo. And I always say about George that he's fantastic fix-it guy, a bit like Paul, and he also has a big goldfish, but that's something that he may tell you about or not. We'll see. So that's George, and he's joining us again from Washington, because this is not, as you probably gathered, with New Zealand, Paul, and George from Washington, obviously with a background from Asia. This is not a UK-centric event alone. Jeremy and I think, probably would say, yeah, well, I'm English and that's good, but Jeremy is our stalwart managing partner. And Jeremy, I love Jeremy, because Jeremy always kind of says, that's a good idea, let's go and try that. Not, oh, no, we haven't done that one yet. It's this, good, happy to try things, nice, we'll get there. Runs a very very good, very effective mid-sized accountancy firm. But I have to be careful what I say because Francesca also works for an accountancy firm. Her role is somewhat different. She's the point person for the whole of Grant Thornton International. There's very little that happens in Grant Thornton International she's unaware of, but she always comes with a smile and a positive attitude to life, which not everybody in that role might do. And last, of course, yours truly, founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum, which is the group that tries to bring everybody together and help the people who run the business get due recognition for their contribution to running that business, because all too often the unsung heroes remain unsung. That's my observation on life anyway. So let's have a look at what we came up with last week on the poll. And this is really interesting, I think, and this has been shared with government as usual. So what's going on here? And this is a bit like, I think when you do a barbecue, these are the kind of the tongs you use to catch the sausage before it falls into the fire. So what's happening around activity? And this is fascinating. Go back to February, and this was before COVID was on anyone's lips, and 80% of our group were thinking about expansion in 2020. 6% were thinking about contraction. And that wasn't seen as particularly surprising. That was just the consensus. That was 75, if I recall, managing partners across the sector, usual crowd, members, etc. All of a sudden, you get, and whether it was a particular date, obviously the image is much clearer than the reality, but we switched. So when we looked at it on the 1st of May, because I think in April everybody was headlights and rabbits and stuff like that, it had kind of very much shifted. So there was a very strong feeling that we were going to be contracting. And now, as of 31st of August, so a couple of weeks ago, back to the same number. So the sausage has got grabbed. So at least we've moved that one forward. When it comes to the new workflow, it's improved. Things are actually looking a bit better than people thought. Again, the same sort of ridiculous 86.4. Now all of a sudden nudging up, although back in June there was quite a big margin between the increase and the contraction. For mathematicians, the neutral one in the middle, because 86 and 4 don't make 100, so 10% said they were neutral, just so that you're aware. In case that you're worried about, I can't do my math. What about headcount? Well, headcount, to be honest, is still the area where I think we're going to see the biggest impact, and that you're beginning to see that with redundancy programs and all sorts at the moment. Wasn't an area that was seen to expand as much. I think people were looking for people to become more efficient, and efficiency, I think, has remained very much the driver for a lot of what we're doing in terms of the current climate. So there's still a gap. It's not the 40% gap we had in June, 44% gap. It's now narrowed to 11, and that's positive. And it may stay there, who knows, in a month's time when we do the tracker again. And government, one day, I think I got this one day late to government, so they asked me, where is it? So we know that they're listening. That's the best way I can possibly tell you. So what about projections in the dip in the firm income? Again, quite interesting. The none has been gently growing, 7% in April, now up to 17. Go back to April, over and 30% or more. Nearly, I think something like half the people were saying, I'm sorry, clicked the wrong button. Whoops, back. That's it. Some 50% were saying, yeah, we're going to have a 30% more dip in our income. And everyone was going around thinking, oh my God, what's happening here? That 50% has now shifted down into the 10% range. And so people are not seeing the same level of projected dip that they were before. What about the people? And we now moved it to December. And this is fascinating. And we did this in another poll, you may recall, looking at the extent to which attitudes towards working from home had changed, the extent to which management recognized that productivity hadn't been adversely affected, anything gone up with people working from home. Now, whether that was Hawthorne effect, people actually for the first time looking after their people, whether that was, or more than that, who knows, but certainly that's the feedback we're getting so far. But quite a significant, only 3% of firms are saying that there'll be nobody working from home at the end of December. 3%. That would not have been the case 6 months ago, 7 months ago, no chance. So that's quite interesting. In terms of general mood, though, that's still pretty apprehensive. That keeps on growing. That's 80% of people are still apprehensive. And most office managers and partners I talk to say probably we might be able to fit in between 40 and 50% of our people. That's probably about it. And even then, it's almost people volunteering to go in, which may suit lots of millennials, but perhaps for other people, it's not a proposition that they're as interested in, particularly as we look over the channel. see the COVID spikes in Germany, France, and other countries at the moment, Spain, etc. So we're not through it yet. So I think the level of apprehension and very relaxed, nobody ever, and there's nobody relaxed actually at 1st of August. So everybody is either apprehensive or neutral. So if anything, the mood has changed. And I think as managing partners, you have to recognize the mood amongst your people. And also you have to think that, well, unless we're offering that remote working, that virtual working mix that people want, we're not going to have any people quite soon, because they'll want to go and work for somebody who can give them that particular mix. So what does that mean for office space requirements? Well, if you're in the property world, not a good slide, this one. Hasn't changed much is the simple answer. If you look at 30% less, it's pretty consistent. Little spike in June, but that may just be surveys. But generally, office space requirements, 20 to 30% are the numbers that are happening for people when they're coming to renew their leases. So what's actually helping? What's getting in the way? What are the things that really are mattering to people? And we've only did this one on a couple of occasions. I looked at it back in February. I looked at it in August, and the one that's fascinating is the financial health of the client base. That wasn't even on the agenda in February. People just weren't even thinking about it. They weren't. But when it comes to things like employee turnover or lack of skills or talent, they were the big issues back in February, hardly measured now. So there's been a mind shift in terms of things that are keeping people focused on what are the constraints that are helping, not getting in the way. And I think we've tried through these shows to talk about optimal performance in many ways. So as I mentioned, feedback from UK government, and they're always on the call or they watch it afterwards. Your poll results are incredibly valuable analysis during these dynamic times. Thank you for government. I mean, unprompted feedback, always the best type. So what are we going to do for today's anonymous poll? Well, we'll start it now. I've got some author notes today, and that's because I've got a great author in Paul. Thank you, Paul. No one else thought of giving me author notes with their particular questions, but I think that's wonderful. Again, quickly, I'm sure you can read it. It's very small words, but I've got a smaller screen. Basically, it's like a spectrum. At one part, around learning, at one level, it's a wild patch of ground that's untended, except occasional blackberry. At the other end, it's a rich, bountiful crop. So what we're trying to find is not really what's actually happening, but what you think should be happening. And it's actually about a trigger for thinking. So the role of formal learning, 50% talking about it being at one end of the spectrum, collaborative effort designed, delivered and supported by multiple stakeholders. Okay, and about 20% in the lower levels. When it comes to informal learning, again, 50% are saying it's recognized by all as a vital part of the learning. When it comes to how our delegates considered, they are considered to have a voice and are more directed in what and when they learn. In terms of managers involved with training, managers are committed to learning and development for their people. Performance diagnostics, this one isn't getting quite so many at the top, possibly, as Paul would know more. This is more towards the first item, well, the second item, really. Some discussions are helping L&D and managers to align courses with the business. So that's obviously an area where people feel that they're not achieving potential. And when it then comes to what extent learning transfer is embedded in the firm, again, the same comment applies in terms of it being more around some discussions. It's a bit of a bolt-on rather than anything embedded in the actual design of the L&D from the beginning. When it comes to governance and the extent to which learning strategy is developed, it is seen to be linked to the corporate strategy, but it's not really that involved in the development of the strategy, if that's the right way of expressing it. In terms of learning data is used primarily to measure and enhance efficiency of programs, with virtually nobody putting data and analytics embedded by design. Looking at the expectations over training outcomes, there again, there's a slightly mixed picture. Some people are, a third are saying that it's about delegates are expected to discuss the training with their manager, but equally about the same percentage, delegates are expected to implement and share what they learned and are given the space to do so. And in terms of the L&D department. About 3/4 of you have such a department. 25% don't, because obviously there are some smaller consultancy firms who we're absolutely happy to have as members and viewers. But the main thing that people look at is that L&D is the place to go for training courses and learning system access. But as I said, that's probably about enough of me for now. So what I'll do, if I may, is I'll stop sharing, and I will also then stop sharing the actual results and invite Paul to come and talk to us and give his insights as to what learning and development should really be all about. Over to you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you. Nice to meet you all. In 5 minutes. Okay, we've got social distancing, and that's really wreaked havoc on how we used to do learning and development. So now what? Now, as I see it, there's really two choices, and which choice you take will probably depend on how mature the learning culture is at your firm, and hence the poll. So interesting, those results. Choice one is figure out which of your training courses are most important and get them converted to a virtual classroom as soon as possible. So, and you'll get some training, virtual, of course, for your in-house trainers on how to deliver virtual training, and maybe also hire in some external resources. So really it's just about a lift and shift into a virtual classroom. Choice two is to take a step back, which is kind of this pit stop analogy that Richard used to set up this session. Again, you'd prioritize your courses, and then you'd ask, well, why are we doing this particular course? What do we want from it? If this course is successful, what would we see that's different after the course is run? So everyone who stops and thinks about this, unless it's some kind of tick box compliance thing, says they want people doing things differently. They talk about doing, not learning. That is, they want behavior change. They want that as the output from their course. They want people behaving in a way that means they can effectively execute the new and changed corporate strategy going forward, and they want an increase in operational efficiency. So these are the things that really should be driving what you're doing and how you're doing. So when you start to realize that a training course is not about learning, it's about behavior change, your thinking can make a little bit of a difference as you sit in that pit stop and consider what to do about that. So your original knee-jerk response of how can we deliver our training course remotely changes to how can we deliver behavior change remotely? So let's ask that question again. How can we deliver behavior change remotely? That's a very different starting point than where learning and development typically starts from. Now, this will have a big impact on what you do with your training courses and how you design them for the future. You'll find, like most organizations I talk with, that the traditional face-to-face training course was never actually that good at creating behavior change reliably anyway. And switching to deliver it online typically only makes it worse at creating behavior change. Then you'll start to think about how behavior change happens and realize it is more about people doing things than about learning things. I mean, if a manager goes on a training course, you don't really care what they learnt on the course, but you do care how effective they are as a manager after the course. So behavior change and habit formation following that behavior change is a process that takes time. It's not an event. In order to change behavior, people need to experiment and practice in a supported environment. And the support in that environment will need to include things like some knowledge and information they can get access to, delivered in different ways and modalities, support from colleagues, and ideally, of course, support from a manager while they practice their new skills. So you start to realize as you are standing in your pit stop and reflecting that if the results you want from a training program are behavior change, then the program needs to span a period of time and include lots of activities and opportunities for practice. Now, a sequence of activities done over a period of time is a workflow. So in essence, you really have a workflow problem to solve, not a training course delivery problem to solve. So it's this refocus I'm really suggesting here. So your training redesign needs to focus on the sequence of activities that'll produce the desired behavior change and how you need to present those activities so they will get done and that the behavior change workflow is successful when someone progresses through it. So at this point, we get into multi-channel blended delivery, facilitated online sessions, and even things like nudge theory and doing this within the within the restrictions imposed by social distancing. It's all possible and far more than we can get into right now in a couple of minutes. So the thing to remember is that it's not complicated. It's just a different way of thinking about training, which springs from your premise question, which remind me, is how can I deliver behavior change? So this different way of thinking will get pushed back from those who are wedded to the old school classroom approach. And that was the purpose of the poll today, is to start giving you an idea of maybe aspirational or what's going on right now, or what would we like to be happening? How mature is your organization? And then how much is the organization going to be prepared to think about that key point I mentioned? How can I deliver behavior change? And of course, these days with social distancing, how can I deliver that remotely? So that's me and the primary kind of challenge I've got for you.
Thanks, Paul. That's a really helpful way, I think, to reframe, and particularly conversations between managing partner and L&D expert may even go in a slightly different direction. Now, if we can achieve that today, then that would be fantastic. Now I'd like to welcome George. George is in Washington State, which is, those of you who know America will know it's on the West Coast, towards the top. And very, very pleased that he's able to join us today. And I think George is going to talk a little bit about his reflections on his very interesting career from medical through to the Director of Customer Success for this amazing platform that we're going to be dipping into a little bit later. George, over to you, sir.
So, Richard, should I just tell a little bit of how I got from medicine to here? Is that would that be helpful?
Go for it.
Okay, so basically, I decided to become a plastic surgeon when I was 17, and I didn't pull out the calculator at the time and figure out it was going to take 15 years on the fast track to become a plastic surgeon. So if you count 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of general surgery residency, and 2 years of plastic surgery residency, that was 15 years. So at the age of 32, I was a freshly minted, highly naive, and business ignorant plastic surgeon. And so I started my practice in the Seattle area, not knowing how to run a practice. I couldn't get a business loan, so I started on high interest credit cards. That didn't go too well. And my accountant, so I didn't know how to, literally didn't know how to run a practice. So by the end of my second year of being in practice, my accountant suggested that I declare bankruptcy. So really good news that my dream job of my day had actually turned into the nightmare of my day. And so I figured, well, that's not too good. I felt obviously humiliated and embarrassed and depressed. But I thought, well, if I declare bankruptcy, how's that going to help? Like, nobody's teaching me anything. My accountant wasn't teaching me anything. Where's I going to learn about business? I didn't know where. So I said, I just need to fire all my advisors. I can figure it out. I figured if I can become a plastic surgeon, I can figure out how to run a business. So I started studying marketing, selling, office systemization, business financial management, and ultimately turned the practice around. I practiced for a few more years after my practice was then purchased by a larger medical center. But what happened to me is I signed up to do reconstructive surgery, but I ended up doing more and more cosmetic surgery because it paid better, and I didn't have to wrestle and tackle the insurance carriers for measly reimbursement. But an interesting thing happened. The more cosmetic surgery I did, the more money I made, the less satisfied I was. So probably about 2 years before I retired at the age of 40, pulled the eject handle. A couple years before that, my wife said to me, just as I got paged to go to the emergency room, that if I kept going like this, I was going to die an early death. And I sort of recall snarling at her and telling her, yeah, you're right. I got to get out of this ridiculous profession. But I didn't know how. And what was happening with me is it wasn't just the cosmetic surgery. I don't have anything against cosmetic surgery, by the way, but it just wasn't what I signed up to do. And I also was quite disillusioned with the disease care system we have in the United States, because it was, hey, let's wait for a problem to happen and let's get all excited about trying to fix it instead of true health and wellness. And I mean that in a holistic way, not just the physical side, but also the mental, emotional, and spiritual and social aspects of being human. So when our second son was born, when I was 40, this is 2003, I found that eject handle and I punched out. But the problem is I didn't have a plan. I wasn't a multi-millionaire at that time. And, but I knew I was just incredibly unhappy, and my dream was done. I fulfilled it. And so time to move on to what was next. I didn't have like I said, didn't have a plan. But I figured, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. If I can figure my way out of complex surgery that isn't going necessarily very well, I can figure my way out of leaving my practice. So I wandered around for a couple years, and then I was part of a book called Create the Business Breakthrough You Want. And I gave that book out to a couple of local landscaping companies, and they asked me if I would coach them. And it kind of went like this: hey, this is a cool book. Could you coach us in my business? And I'm thinking, I'll do that while I figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. And within 2 weeks of coaching these two different businesses, I realized I knew a heck of a lot more about entrepreneurship than I realized. So I thought, well, why don't I make this a profession? And so, I didn't have any business contacts at all. All my contacts were from the medical world, but I decided, okay, I'll do it. And nobody had ever paid me a penny for business advice, but I said, okay, that's perfect. It'll work out perfectly. I'll do it. So what I ended up doing is I set up a live workshop. I had a backup plan. We were hemorrhaging money at that time too. That wasn't bringing in money for 2 years. And my wife said, what's your backup plan? I said, honey, you're looking at him. She said, that's not quite what I had in mind. But actually, I really did have a backup plan. It was to do cosmetic surgery in Beverly Hills. I was going to commute from Seattle on the weekends to go to Beverly Hills. And for those of you who know Beverly Hills is one of the meccas of cosmetic surgery here in the United States. So I was going to do it, not that I really was excited about it, but I was going to do it to pay the bills. But I stalled, and I said, well, I can figure out business, and I'll teach people how to do it. So I set up a workshop, and within 73 days of scheduling the date of that workshop, I had enough clients. I was bringing in $10,500 US a month on 12-month-long contracts. And I said, goodbye to Beverly Hills. I'm not coming. And that was 2005 that this happened. And since then, I've worked with entrepreneurs literally from around the world, from Fortune 500 companies to single solopreneur startups from all different industry categories. And along the way, my business partner and I wrote a book that I think, Richard, you and your community here would be interested in. And for some reason, I don't understand why. Maybe you can answer this question for me. Maybe everybody in the audience can help me understand why this book will not be a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. This is the book. Financial Statements Made Practical, a step-by-step visual guide. And it really is a visual guide, right? It's not all text like a lot of financial books, right? Can you see that? Yeah. So anyhow, we wrote that. We also created software called Profit Stash that helps you to set proper business goals. You start with your financial goals and then set your your sales goals, and then set your marketing goals in that order, right? And so the software will allow you to do that. The software will also predict your cash flow months in advance, like a crystal ball. And this came out of this is kind of like therapy for me, because I knew nothing about business financial management when I was a plastic surgeon, or early days of being a plastic surgeon. And then along the way, I was rightly accused of being an entrepreneur masquerading as a plastic surgeon. So yeah, that was an accurate diagnosis for me. I actually suffer from a condition. There's no surgery or medication for it. Don't feel sorry for me. It's called EDD. You ever heard of it? EDD, it's called Entrepreneur Deficit Disorder. Yeah. Any idea, I love it. Would love to chase every single idea. I'll need 1,000 lifetimes to chase them all down. Yeah. So it becomes a challenge. But anyhow, so how I ended up here is I've loved working with entrepreneurs. I'm a big fan, Paul, of accelerated learning. Ever since college, it's been one of my side hobbies to study successful learning techniques, and from the learner's perspective, but also from the teacher perspective. I'm a big fan of studying instructional design. And in fact, I'm part of a team. We're developing a software that's a smart online course platform that includes the best practices of successful learning and instructional design that have been studied and published in many scientific journals for the live classroom, but there is a dearth of application in the online platform. So we're looking to change that. How I got involved with Remo is I've always been interested in human relationships and interactions. And so when I saw Remo, which allows you to see and hear each other like we are here, except you can move from virtual table to table at free will, and you can move from floor to floor, and you can move from one virtual building to another at free will. I realized that this is a revolution in really connecting with people. And the world was already flat because of the internet, but all of a sudden when I saw Remo, I said, the world suddenly got flatter, because in an instant, like we are here tonight, we can be connected literally from around the world. The difference between, say, we're on Zoom here today, but the difference between Zoom and Remo is because in Remo, we have the opportunity to move around to different talks, to different presentations, different whiteboards, watch different videos, all at free will. So it gives you really the experience that rivals being there live and in person.
Thank you, George. That was I love that story. We don't always hear people's life story, but I thought that's really fascinating. And how many of your partners, Francesca, do you think would have started off and have actually moved from plastic surgery into giving business advice, or is it the other way around? How many possibly are thinking about becoming plastic surgeons?
The raciest we get are people who are lawyers who move into accountancy. But I love that story, George. That was so inspiring.
So welcome, Francesca, new puppy in tow, I gather, and welcome, Jeremy. For those of you who have been on the show before, and I know that's most of you, they're very much regulars and stalwarts, and quite how yours truly selected you guys for episode 1. I don't recall, but I obviously was inspired that day, is all I can say. So where would you like to, Jeremy, come in for a second and let's hear a bit about learning, and do some of those messages, particularly from Paul around reframing, around behavior change, how do they sort of resonate with you?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. A bit wet where I am this morning, which we were looking forward to, but of course now it's here. We wish we had the sun back, but never mind. Yeah, very, very interesting presentation, Paul. Thank you very much for that. And there's certainly a number of things that resonate with me there. And I guess the key one was how to deliver behavior change. And maybe that's the way we should be looking at learning and development, as opposed to it being very formalized and structured. Obviously, in our business, in the accountancy profession, a lot of our training is very structured, and we have to have a certain element of training from a technical point of view. And as you imagine, we are less good at structured training around those softer areas. I mean, we do that, but it's always a challenge with regard to time and cost. I think at the moment we are, and I think I may have mentioned this previously, but we have put in place some internal one-to-one sessions whereby all partners who are willing to participate in the program have identified areas where they would be willing to talk to any of our managers. And that's not technical areas. That might be their experience of working overseas, their experience of working in business, various different experiences really away from their day job, such that our managers can tap into them for one-to-one advice around different aspects. So that's going down quite well, and that's an initiative we've put. And again, that's just sharing that knowledge and sharing those experiences. I think the virtual classroom is interesting. There's been obviously a greater opportunity to tap into more information, more learning in that regard. But at the same time, it is, I think, as Paul recognised, it does have its challenges. There isn't the interaction within the room that you get when you're physically present. There isn't the questioning and the challenging and learning from that. That doesn't happen, we find, so much when you're online compared to when you're physically in the room. So those are just some of my observations from what Paul had to say from a Hayes McIntyre perspective.
And is there anything else, Jeremy, that you want to share with us quickly over the last couple of weeks since you were on the show? Has anything
Yeah.
happened, or is the fact that nothing's happened of equal importance?
I think the slides that you showed, Richard, and the 1st of August findings are interesting. Whether it's, my feeling is that it's probably dipped a little bit since the 1st of August in terms of that positive slant that was being shown. Now, sometimes it's difficult to assess. Obviously, we're in holiday period, but just the general points around, financial health of clients, economic outlook, that I'd certainly, probably even in the last 2 weeks since we did that last one on the 1st of August, I certainly feel that those two things are starting to give me some concern as managing partner and just looking at where the business is going. I think the other thing that is interesting, I know a number of people who are outside London, have returned to offices. We're returning next week for a trial period, and I think, and I've talked to some other managing partners in London. This hybrid situation where you're now getting a lot of our people saying, yes, I'd like to work from home some of the time, I'd like to work from the office some of the time, that 2-3 day split, however that looks, that whole hybrid, I think, is going to be a challenge for us, how we manage that. And that's not just, one team A in 1 week, team B in another week, that whole hybrid situation looking forward where people are now saying, actually, I want that split. How does that work and how do you manage that? And I think rolling on that hybrid thought is meetings as well. That you're going to start having those hybrid meetings where you've got 6 people in a meeting, 3 of whom are physically present together and 3 of whom are online. And I think that presents really new challenges for us. I think that's something that's not going to be straightforward. So those are some observations from my thinking over the last few weeks.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's great. And I think the hybrid is a really important point, because I always kind of think that if you think back pre-COVID, then if you were sort of on a meeting and you were coming in through either video or possibly a speakerphone or something like that, you were effectively a second-class citizen in that meeting. You didn't pick up the cues and clues. You listened, but you didn't really understand to the same extent. And I don't think management is going to be able to have that sort of second-class citizen divide anymore. And given that, if we've seen from the stats, most firms, a significant proportion, could be up half or 3/4, are going to have people still working from home because the pressure is no longer there. And it was peer pressure before. It was management's concern about productivity that was driving it. That was very clear from the poll the previous week. I think one's going to have to actually work out another way to bring people together. I mean, I actually think Remo is really interesting in that space. So we'll hopefully have a chance to play with it, if not today, because I'm being busy, but actually I think that does begin to solve some of that questions. I mean, George, do you have any thoughts on that issue about how you can bring people together in a virtual meeting in a way that they feel is as close to a real meeting as possible?
Yeah. So I would, Jeremy was mentioning that it's difficult to replicate what you have in a live classroom or a live meeting. And I would respectfully challenge that, because my experience and observation has been with thousands of people, including our own team using Remo, is that we've been able to, have experiences of meetings and educational programs and even games. I came from a meeting, actually a happy hour with the Remo team, where we had a game night. We were playing online games and we're moving from table to table, and we would mix and match our teammates, and because we could have 6 to 8 people per table. And so similarly, but the challenge is, along to Jeremy, along with what Jeremy was saying, is that the online structure, teaching online, has to be structured differently than in the live classroom. And if it's done properly, I believe that, and my experience and observation has borne this out, is that learning can be effective and relationship building can be as effective as it is live in person. One quick example. So I've worked remotely since 2005. One of my business partners, with whom I wrote the book that I showed you, that will not be the New York Times bestseller, and the financial software Profit Stash, We've worked together on this Fortune 500 aerospace manufacturing company project. I've met him twice in person over the last 15 years. Mostly we talk on the phone or by Skype or Zoom or Remo now, right? And so I know from experience it's possible to develop very long-lasting collaborative relationships. And that's what I look forward to, Richard, on Remo and other platforms, is that the world has gotten flatter, and we develop ways to connect with others respectfully and in a collaborative manner.
Paul, what do you think? I mean, you've been developing some learning software now, and that's your primary business, I know, and in sort of anticipation of a more virtual world. Where do you see the point that Jeremy's making around it's going to be difficult for management to manage meetings and get-togethers in a way that possibly they didn't do them previously?
Well, I'll answer that with a story. Once upon a time in a land far away, in fact, it was in George's land. They took a stage show and they converted it to a movie, which was black and white, jerky, Charlie Chaplin with a ladder and a piano in the corner and subtitles. So they lost a lot of the richness of the stage show and they put it onto this rather rinky-dink setup in a movie theater. Decades later, movies are now equal to, and so now we've got all the experience that's been built up over time in the movie industry, creating events and performances that are as good as, but different to the stage shows, which are still there. We have the same thing with the online, where we're kind of been busted back to toddler status. We're learning to run all over again in a different environment. And there are some, George obviously is one, and I know others who've got a huge lot of experience in this space, and they would say, actually, well, I'd never go back to a standard classroom because I can achieve as much or more in a virtual one, but it's different. And so it's learning how those differences are. And just because you're good in a standard classroom doesn't mean you're going to shine in a virtual one. But the other thing you've got to remember is that the synchronous time in a virtual classroom is valuable time. So you've got to use it for what it's good for. And then you've got to take the stuff that it's not so good at and put it into other modalities or channels, whether that's e-learning or talking head videos or whatever that is. There's so many different channels that we can utilize digitally. And then, of course, you've got to have the practical doing stuff, the practicing, the experimentation, the activities. So in other words, your learning takes on a whole new paradigm when you're thinking about how do we get this learning, but make sure that it's creating an effective behavior change and therefore operational efficiency and effectiveness. So it isn't just about learning, although that's a part of it. So it's great, George, that you're doing something on using all the learning theory, but there's more to it than that when you think about the learning transfer and making it operationalizing what you've got.
Yeah, I have
Francesca, sorry. Yeah, I'll just perhaps call Francesca in now, if I may.
Sure.
Oh, sure. Yes. Sorry, George. We'll make sure we come back to you there. But no, it is. I mean, the whole L&D field is utterly fascinating because I think, as both Paul and George have pointed out, so much of the old world was very, very static, and it's fascinating to see how people are really embracing this opportunity to teach in a different way. I mean, I used to do, pre-COVID, I'd be doing 2 events a month at least, usually with multiple countries, multiple territories, people with very different cultures, and we often struggled around the cultural piece, creating a learning environment where people coming with different language skills, but also different approaches, could still get a good experience, but we were delivering it all face-to-face. So moving that to online has been a real revelation about how you can definitely achieve this, and the value of software that enables you to move as if you were going from table to table has been a massive boon, and also having something that isn't reliant on other people's bandwidth as well, having something where all the hard stuff, all the video stuff, all the big stuff is sitting somewhere else, and people don't need to have epic broadband and chuck their kids off Netflix to be able to access it. So it's been really fascinating to see how that works. I mean, I would love to hear from Paul and George around how you actually embed the learning and that behavioural change, that practicality piece. Because, I mean, even with face-to-face learning, we all know that, and I think Paul, you did it beautifully in the survey, we all know the happy sheet is often where it ends. People go back, they might even have a manual, they stick it on the shelf, you never look at it again, and maybe they do a little presentation to their team when they come back. but it's that embedding the learning. And you do feel that probably in the virtual online environment, we have ability to get better at this, a way to show that that learning is being embedded. So I'd really love to hear, what Paul and George's thoughts on that.
Well, that's an invitation to you, Paul. Go for it.
Well, I literally wrote the book on it, so it's that simple. It was my third book, and it's on learning transfer. You can find me on LinkedIn or whatever if you want to find that stuff, or paul-matthews.com. But it's really, as I said in my little 5-minute piece, it's about a workflow of activities. And if you can set up that workflow with all the right activities, some of which will be content consumption, and of course, as Jeremy mentioned, some of the technical stuff, it means there'll be more content consumption than otherwise if it's a more technical program, but there will still be things that people need to do and practice along the way. And eventually you're still wanting behavior change. You want them, when presented with this problem, we want them to behave in this way. And in doing so, they will utilize all that content and learning they've got. So it's still about utilization and making it operational. And there's lots of different ways to do that. In the back of that learning transfer book, there's 166, I think it is, tips on how to do it. So, fill your boots, basically. And any questions, give me a call. I love to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, 166 would take quite a long time to go through. I just think I'd probably get up to about 5 if I tried. George, sorry to interrupt you earlier, but give us your thoughts, please.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Yeah. So I have a saying that information is interesting, but implementation means everything. And so I'd rather, quote, read or know less from a theory standpoint and be able to apply more. And so one of the things that we found that's very effective is having people do role plays if they're developing or learning new things, practicing techniques, and also teaching each other. Teaching is one of the best ways to learn. So a lot of times we'll put people in small groups and they need to teach each other different pieces of what they've learned. And I think Paul will agree that's one of the proven methods of helping to embed the learning and taking it back to the workplace or the school place or the home.
Jeremy, has the panel sort of come up with some ideas that help point you in some new directions, or is this stuff you kind of have heard already?
Yes, definitely, and I think there's some good things there. I very much enjoyed George's story, and I think the one thing that stood out for me from that was perhaps bravery. I think it is a time we have to be brave at the moment, whilst being sensible, and certainly that's something I've taken away. But yes, very much so from the L&D information as well. And yeah, I take the points that Paul and George have made about the virtual classrooms. I think they work reasonably well, and certainly can be improved to work very well. In our case, I come back to the point, it's that hybrid situation. How are we going to manage that I think is more of a challenge, where you've got some people physically present and some people online, and just dealing with that, I think, is just the how you manage that and deal with that. It's easier, and we've had it in the past where there's perhaps been one person phoning into a meeting or a couple of people, but where you've got a real split, which I think is going to happen more and more because of this desire for people to be 2 or 3 day split in the office working from home, then I think there will be some challenges around that.
Okay, we're in the last couple of minutes before we all, but hopefully some, trip off to Remo. Francesca, just picking up that point around management challenges. I mean, you talk to many managing partners around the world, and I'm sure many of them are struggling with the same issue that Jeremy's highlighted around how do I take this firm from where it was in its knowledge sharing, behavior change space to a place where people are getting together in different ways. I mean, what's your what's the messages that are coming back from your world, and in terms of how management is coping, put it that way?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing a surprisingly number of common themes, be it Western world, Eastern world, or somewhere in the middle. a desire to share knowledge a lot more. I think one of the things that perhaps is always a challenge between different countries sitting in a common organization, be it a corporate or a professional services firm, is how do you share knowledge in a meaningful way? Because you can put knowledge on a site and it gets out of date or it doesn't get viewed. How do you really truly share that knowledge? And I think that's something that's been quite intriguing around the pandemic, and people, the desire to share knowledge is in fact actually grown, mainly because out of high risk areas, people are desperate to get best advice, best information, and that's driven a desire to look for information in different ways. So I think that's a powerful piece. But I think there's also a really, really intriguing thing going on in relation to how people are trying to stay connected, really connected, not just connected in I have a singular transaction around a client, I need to be connected to deliver it, but how they want to stay connected in a way that enables them, without the ability to meet each other face to face, to really do things together. So I was chatting, for example, to 5 of our Asian firms. We've got about 20 Asian firms, but 5 of them in the Southeast Asian bloc. And for quite a while, we've been saying, why don't we go to market together a little bit more? They're individual firms, but how do we market ourselves together? And actually, the pandemic has driven them to actually go together in a much more connected way because their clients want it. Their clients are going, we've got domestic issues around our own client supply chain, our own world. We want to look in a broader way, and we can mirror some of that. So that out of every challenge, there comes opportunities. And I think there's a very interesting way that people are embracing the new world and going, let's listen to what clients are really looking for, but what clients are saying is they themselves are looking to see how they can be better connected with whatever it is that they're delivering, and they expect our advisors to providing an equal level of connectivity. So that's going to be an important part of the next few months, I believe.
Just for those who don't know, all the videos are in the management library, but here we've got something completely different. You may have read the stuff about Remo. You've heard a bit about from George, who kind of works with it. There's a link at the bottom, which I've shared with you already. We're moving to Remo now. And if you get to a screen that looks a bit like this, then you know you've got to a good place, because that's what it's going to end up looking like. Bye for now.